It started with an ordinary inconvenience, a delayed flight, a missed connection, and a couple of days stuck in a hotel far from home. But what unfolded between me and Mason during those 2 days was anything but ordinary. It was the kind of connection that altered the fabric of your life, the kind that whispered to you that boundaries and roles were meant to be crossed. I hadn't meant for it to happen. I'd spent years perfecting the role of the devoted wife, the supportive stepmother, the woman who always knew her place. But life has a funny way of unraveling in the most unexpected places. An airport bar, a quiet bench overlooking the city skyline, a hotel room far away from anyone who might pass judgment. What Mason and I shared during those hours was electric, forbidden, and utterly transformative. But what came after, what we uncovered, was more dangerous than either of us could have imagined. I'd been sitting in the airport lounge for hours, staring at the blinking departure screen that never seemed to change. The storm outside had grounded nearly every flight, and the air buzzed with the restless energy of stranded travelers. My husband, Victor, had called only once to check in. "Just wait it out, Claire," he'd said in his usual brusque tone. "You'll get home eventually." Victor didn't ask how I was doing or if I needed anything. He rarely did anymore. For the last decade, our marriage had been more of a partnership of convenience than a romantic union. He worked long hours as an investment banker, and I filled my time with interior design projects, charity events, and the occasional dinner party. We existed in parallel, connected only by shared obligations. Mason, Victor's son from his first marriage, was seated across from me, engrossed in his laptop. He'd inherited his father's sharp jawline and intense work ethic, but where Victor was distant and calculating, Mason had a warmth that I'd always found intriguing. We weren't particularly close. Our relationship was cordial but formal, defined more by the roles we played than genuine connection. "Any updates?" Mason asked, glancing up at me. "Still nothing," I replied, forcing a polite smile. "Looks like we're stuck for a while." He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair. "Guess we'd better make the best of it." When the announcement finally came through that our flight was canceled, we were shuffled to a nearby hotel along with dozens of other frustrated passengers. It was a sleek, modern place in the heart of the city. The kind of hotel designed for business travelers who valued efficiency over charm. Mason and I checked in at the same time, exchanging tired glances as we were handed our key cards. "I'm going to grab a drink," he said as we stepped into the elevator. "Want to join me?" I hesitated. Under normal circumstances, I would have declined. There was something about spending time alone with Mason that felt complicated. But the thought of sitting in my room, staring at the sterile walls, was unbearable. "Sure," I said finally. "Why not?" The rooftop bar was dimly lit, with panoramic windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the lights outside shimmered against the wet pavement below. Mason ordered an old-fashioned, and I settled for a glass of white wine, grateful for the familiar comfort of alcohol to take the edge off my unease. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing more easily than I'd expected. Mason told me about his startup, a tech company focused on sustainability, and the challenges of running a business in his 20s. I shared stories from my career in interior design, surprised by how genuinely interested he seemed in the details. "You're more creative than I realized," he said at one point, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I guess I always thought of you as, well, just Dad's wife." I laughed, though the comment stung slightly. "Well, I suppose that's fair. I've never been great at showing people who I really am." "That's a shame," he said, his gaze lingering on me. "There's a lot more to you than meets the eye." His words hung between us, and for the first time in years, I felt something stir. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that someone had noticed the parts of me I'd long buried beneath the roles of wife and stepmother. I sipped my wine, letting the warmth of it soften the edges of my unease. "You're full of surprises yourself," I said, hoping to shift the attention back to him. "I didn't know you were so passionate about sustainability. Victor never mentioned it." Mason's smile turned wry. "Dad and I don't exactly see eye to eye on a lot of things. He thinks what I'm doing is a waste of time, that I should be working for a real company." His words, not mine. "That sounds like him," I admitted. Victor's always been practical to a fault. That's a diplomatic way of putting it, Mason said with a chuckle. For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the hum of quiet conversation and the soft clink of glasses filling the air around us. The view from the rooftop was stunning, the city a tapestry of glowing lights against the rain-slicked streets. You know, Mason said, breaking the silence, it's kind of nice being stuck here with you. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his honesty. Oh? Why's that? He hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the window as if searching for the right words. I guess I've never really had the chance to get to know you. Not like this. You're different than I thought. Different how? I asked, my voice softer now. He met my eyes, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. I think I'll keep that to myself for now. The tension in the air was subtle but undeniable, and I felt my pulse quicken as his words lingered in my mind. It was just the two of us here, far from the watchful eyes of family or society, and the boundaries that usually kept us in our respective roles felt more porous than ever. The following day, the rain continued, and the airline gave no indication of when flights might resume. Mason suggested we explore the city to pass the time, and though I hesitated at first, I couldn't deny the appeal of venturing out with him. We wandered through cobblestone streets, ducking into art galleries and small cafes, the kind of places I rarely visited with Victor. At one point, we stumbled upon a quiet park tucked between towering buildings, its paths lined with rain-soaked benches and blooming flowers. This feels like a little secret, I said, sitting down on one of the benches beneath an overhang. Mason joined me, his coat damp from the drizzle. I like finding places like this, he said. They make the chaos of the city feel manageable. I smiled, watching as he tilted his head back to gaze at the sky. The rain had slowed to a light mist, the air cool and fresh. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened, as though I could breathe without the weight of expectation pressing down on me. Do you ever feel like you've lost yourself? I asked suddenly, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Mason turned to me, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? I mean, do you ever feel like you've become someone else, someone you don't even recognize, just to fit into a role? He was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Yeah, he said finally. I think we all do in a way. But it's up to us to figure out how to get back to who we really are. His words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. I'm not sure I even know who I am anymore, I admitted. Mason reached out, his hand brushing mine in a gesture that felt both comforting and electric. Maybe this trip is a chance to figure that out, he said. Later that evening, back at the hotel, we found ourselves at the rooftop bar again. The city lights sparkled below, and the hum of quiet conversation created a cocoon of intimacy around us. You've got this way of seeing the world, Mason said, his voice low. It's refreshing. I don't think I've ever told you that. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. Thank you, I said softly. We stayed there for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly as the barriers between us dissolved. By the time we returned to our rooms, I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and unease, as though I were standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite name. The next morning, the city was shrouded in mist, the rain casting a dreamy haze over the streets. Mason suggested a walk to a nearby viewpoint, a hill overlooking the city that promised breathtaking views despite the weather. We walked side by side in comfortable silence, the soft patter of rain creating a rhythm to our steps. When we reached the top, the sight before us took my breath away. The city stretched out like a living mosaic, the rain lending it a surreal, shimmering quality. This is incredible, I whispered, my voice almost lost in the quiet. Mason stood beside me, his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes I think moments like this are what life's all about, just being here, now. I turned to him, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. There was something in his gaze, a depth of emotion that I hadn't noticed before. Thank you, I said softly. For what? For being here, for seeing me. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made my heart ache in the best way. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached out, my hand brushing against his. The touch was fleeting, but it set something in motion, a spark that neither of us could ignore. We stood there, the rain falling softly around us, the city a silent witness to the moment that changed everything. The rain had started again by the time we left the viewpoint, a steady drizzle that painted the city in shades of silver and gray. Mason offered me his jacket, but I shook my head, enjoying the cool drops on my skin. It felt like a cleansing, as if the rain could wash away the weight of everything I'd been carrying. "You're quiet," Mason said as we descended the hill, his voice cutting through the rhythm of our steps. I glanced at him, my thoughts still tangled in the moment we'd shared at the top. "Just thinking. About how strange this all is," I admitted. "Being here, with you. It feels different." He raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Different good or different bad?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Different good, I think. It's been a long time since I felt this light." He nodded, his expression softening. "I get that. Sometimes life feels so heavy, but then something or someone comes along and reminds you what it's like to just be." His words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt a warmth rise in my chest. We walked in silence for a while, with the city unfolding around us as the rain eased into a soft mist. Back at the hotel, I found myself reluctant to part ways with Mason. He seemed to sense it, pausing outside my door as if waiting for me to say something. "Do you want to grab a drink or something?" he asked finally, his tone casual but his eyes searching mine. I hesitated, torn between the voice in my head urging me to keep my distance and the pull I felt toward him, a magnetic force I couldn't explain. "Sure," I said, surprising even myself. "Just give me a few minutes to freshen up." When we met again in the lobby, the atmosphere between us had shifted. There was an unspoken understanding, a quiet awareness that neither of us dared to acknowledge out loud. We wandered through the hotel, eventually finding a quiet lounge tucked away on one of the upper floors. It was nearly empty, the dim lighting and soft jazz music creating an intimate cocoon around us. Mason ordered a whiskey, and I opted for another glass of wine, the familiar comfort of it helping to steady my nerves. "This feels like one of those moments you don't forget," Mason said after a while, his voice low. "What do you mean?" I asked, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass. "I mean, this, sitting here with you. It feels important somehow." I smiled, though my heart was racing. "You have a way of making everything sound profound, you know that?" He chuckled, his gaze never leaving mine. "Maybe, or maybe it's just you." The weight of his words settled between us, and I felt the air shift, the tension growing as the seconds ticked by. I looked away, focusing on the flickering candle in the center of the table, but I could still feel his eyes on me, warm and steady. "Mason," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "This, whatever this is, it's dangerous." "Maybe," he admitted, "but sometimes the best things in life are." I met his gaze, and for a moment, I saw something there that made my breath catch. A mix of vulnerability and desire that mirrored my own. It was a look that spoke of unspoken truths and uncharted territory, and it left me feeling both exhilarated and terrified. "I should probably go," I said, rising from my seat. He stood as well, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'll walk you back." The walk to my room was a blur, my thoughts a chaotic mess of emotions I couldn't untangle. When we reached my door, I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Good night," I said softly, my hand resting on the door handle. "Good night, Claire," he replied, his voice gentle. For a moment, neither of us moved, the silence between us heavy with everything we weren't saying. Then, before I could stop myself, I leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. It was meant to be innocent, a simple gesture of gratitude for his kindness. But as I pulled back, my lips brushed against his, and the spark I'd been trying to ignore ignited into something I couldn't contain. He froze for a moment, as if unsure of what to do, and I felt a rush of panic. But then his hand came up to cup my face, his touch warm and steady, and I knew there was no turning back. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as though we were both testing the waters. But as the seconds passed, it deepened, a fire building between us that left me breathless. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself surrendering to the moment, to the emotions I'd kept bottled up for so long. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling in the quiet hallway. "Claire," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," I whispered, my heart racing. "This can't happen. It's wrong." But it feels right, he said, his eyes searching mine. I didn't have an answer for that. All I knew was that the walls I'd built around myself were crumbling, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying the kiss in my mind. The guilt was there, sharp and unrelenting, but so was the memory of his touch, the way he'd looked at me as though I were the only person in the world. I told myself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness that couldn't be repeated. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Something had shifted between us, something I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. The next morning, Mason was waiting for me in the lobby, his expression unreadable. When he saw me, he offered a small smile, his eyes warm and understanding. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft. "Morning," I replied, my heart skipping a beat. We didn't talk about the night before, but the tension between us was palpable. It was as though an invisible thread connected us, pulling us closer even as I tried to maintain my distance. As the day wore on, I found myself drawn to him, unable to resist the pull of his presence. And by the time the sun began to set, I knew that whatever boundaries we'd crossed, there was no going back. The rain had returned by the time we sat down for dinner that evening, a steady patter against the hotel's tall windows. The dining room was quiet, most of the other travelers having retreated to their rooms after another day of uncertainty. Mason and I sat near the corner, our table illuminated by a single flickering candle. The air between us felt different now, charged, almost fragile. I caught him glancing at me several times, and each time I looked away, unsure of what I'd see in his eyes. "You've been quiet today," he said finally, breaking the silence. I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. "Just thinking." "About last night?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "It was a mistake, Mason. We both know that." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his gaze steady. "Was it, though? Because it didn't feel like one to me." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's not that simple. You're my stepson. Whatever this is, it's wrong." "Maybe," he admitted, "but does it feel wrong to you?" His question hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, it didn't feel wrong, not in the way it should have. It felt complicated, yes, dangerous, absolutely, but it also felt real, like the most honest thing I'd experienced in years. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Claire, I need to know. Is this just me, or do you feel it too?" I looked at him, my defenses crumbling under the weight of his gaze. "I feel it," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But that doesn't mean it's right." "Sometimes the right thing isn't the thing that makes sense," he said softly. "Sometimes it's just what you need." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I let myself imagine a world where it could be that simple. A world where I didn't have to worry about Victor or what society would think, where I could follow my heart without fear of the consequences. But that wasn't the world we lived in, and I knew it. "We can't do this, Mason," I said finally, pulling my hand away. "It's too much." He leaned back, his expression tinged with disappointment but not surprise. "I get it," he said quietly, "but that doesn't change how I feel about you." I felt a pang of guilt, knowing I'd given him hope only to take it away. "Mason, you're a wonderful man, kind, intelligent, passionate. But it's not just about us. There are other people involved, people who could get hurt." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "I know, but that doesn't make it any easier to walk away." Later that evening, I found myself wandering the hotel's halls, unable to sleep. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, longing, fear. I kept replaying our conversation, his words echoing in my head like a melody I couldn't forget. Eventually, I ended up in the lounge, hoping a change of scenery would quiet my thoughts. I wasn't expecting to find Mason there, sitting alone in one of the leather armchairs by the window. He looked up as I entered, his expression softening when he saw me. "Couldn't sleep either?" I shook my head, taking the seat across from him. "My mind won't stop racing." "Same here," he admitted, leaning back in his chair. We sat in silence for a while, the rain streaking the windows like liquid silver. Despite everything, his presence was comforting, grounding me in a way I couldn't explain. "I feel like I've been living someone else's life," I said suddenly, surprising even myself. He turned to me, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I mean, my marriage, my career, everything. It's like I've been playing a role for so long, I don't even know who I am anymore. Mason nodded, his gaze thoughtful. I think a lot of people feel that way, but it takes courage to admit it, to even recognize it. I sighed, looking down at my hands. I don't know if it's courage or just exhaustion. I've spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect stepmother, the perfect everything. And now I feel like I don't even know what I want. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. What do you want, Claire? If you could have anything, anything at all, what would it be? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. What did I want? It was a question I'd stopped asking myself years ago, too consumed by the demands of my life to even consider the possibility of something more. I want to feel alive again, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Mason reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. You deserve that, he said softly. You deserve to be happy. His words brought tears to my eyes, and I looked away, afraid of what he might see in my expression. But deep down, I knew he was right. I did deserve to be happy. I just didn't know how to get there. We talked for hours that night, sharing pieces of ourselves we'd never shared with anyone else. Mason told me about his struggles with his father, the pressure he felt to live up to Victor's impossible standards. I told him about the loneliness that had crept into my marriage, the way Victor's indifference had made me feel invisible. By the time the sun began to rise, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as though our conversation had peeled back layers I hadn't even realized were there. Mason, I said softly, my voice tinged with both gratitude and sadness, thank you. For what? For seeing me, I replied, tears welling in my eyes, for reminding me what it feels like to be noticed. He smiled, a quiet, genuine smile that made my heart ache. You deserve that, Claire. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise. As I stood to leave, he reached for my hand one last time, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. And in that touch, I felt a promise, a quiet understanding that, no matter what happened next, we had given each other something that couldn't be undone. The hours after our conversation in the lounge passed in a haze. I spent the morning wandering through the hotel, my thoughts racing with everything Mason had said. His words lingered in my mind, intertwining with my own doubts and desires, creating a storm I couldn't seem to quiet. By mid-afternoon, the rain had cleared, leaving the city bathed in soft, golden light. I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would help me find some clarity. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed with a message from Mason. Meet me on the terrace. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Every rational part of me screamed that I should ignore him, that I should let this moment pass before it became something I couldn't undo. But the pull I felt toward him was too strong, a magnetic force I couldn't resist. On my way, I replied, my heart pounding as I stepped out of the elevator and made my way to the rooftop terrace. The terrace was quiet when I arrived, the tables and chairs still damp from the rain. Mason was leaning against the railing, his back to me, his gaze fixed on the skyline. The setting sun cast a warm glow over his profile, and for a moment I paused, unsure of what to say. He turned as I approached, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Hey. Hey, I replied, my voice softer than I intended. We stood there in silence for a moment, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he gestured toward a nearby bench. Sit with me? I nodded, following him to the bench and sitting down beside him. The view from the terrace was breathtaking, the city stretching out before us in a kaleidoscope of colors. This is beautiful, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It is, he agreed, his gaze fixed on me instead of the skyline. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, and I looked away, focusing on the horizon. What are we doing, Mason? He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. I don't know. All I know is that being here with you feels right. Like I've finally found something I didn't know I was looking for. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I turned to him, my heart racing. This can't happen, I said softly, though the conviction in my voice was fading. But it already is, he replied, his gaze steady. The honesty in his words left me breathless, and I felt my defenses crumbling under the weight of everything we'd shared. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him we needed to stop, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "Claire," he said, his voice tinged with both vulnerability and determination. "I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking for right now." I stared at him, my thoughts a chaotic swirl of fear and longing. Part of me wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of my room and pretend this moment had never happened. But another part of me, the part that had been starved for connection, for passion, couldn't walk away. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, my voice trembling. "You don't have to know," he said softly. "Just let it happen." The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time we made our way back inside, the city lights twinkling like stars against the darkened sky. Mason walked beside me, his hand resting lightly on my back, a gesture that felt both comforting and possessive. When we reached his room, he paused at the door, his gaze searching mine. "Are you sure?" I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment, the line we couldn't uncross. But as I looked at him, at the quiet vulnerability in his expression, I felt my resolve slip away. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He opened the door, and I stepped inside, my breath catching as the reality of what we were about to do sank in. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn, creating a cocoon of privacy that felt both thrilling and terrifying. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. Then slowly, Mason reached for me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders. "You can tell me to stop," he said, his voice low and steady. "I won't," I replied, my voice firm despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. What happened next was a blur of sensations, a mix of hesitation and urgency that left me breathless. Mason was both gentle and passionate, his touch igniting a fire I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself go, surrendering to the moment and everything it represented. When it was over, we lay in silence, our breathing the only sound in the room. Mason's arm was draped over me, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my skin. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts a tangled web of guilt, exhilaration, and something I couldn't quite name. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice pulling me from my reverie. "I don't know," I admitted, turning to face him. "I feel different." He nodded, his gaze steady. "So do I." I searched his face, looking for some sign of regret, but all I saw was quiet determination. "What happens now?" he sighed, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." The next morning, the world felt both the same and completely different. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean, and the air was crisp and cool. Mason and I shared breakfast in the hotel dining room, our conversation light and easy despite the undercurrent of tension that lingered between us. I couldn't stop thinking about the night before, about the choices we'd made and what they meant for our lives moving forward. Part of me wanted to push it all aside, to pretend it had never happened. But another part of me, the part that had felt alive in his arms, knew that wasn't possible. As we prepared to leave the hotel and return to our normal lives, Mason pulled me aside, his expression serious. "Claire," he said, his voice low, "no matter what happens, I don't regret a single moment." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "Neither do I." And as we stepped out into the city, the sun shining down on us, I knew that everything had changed. Returning home felt like stepping back into a familiar prison. The walls of the house, once a place of comfort and routine, now felt suffocating. Victor was there, of course, calm, polished, and oblivious as ever. He greeted me with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, barely glancing up from his laptop as I set my bags down. "Good trip?" he asked, his tone disinterested. "It was fine," I replied, my voice neutral. I glanced at Mason, who had walked in behind me, his expression carefully blank. It was strange seeing him here again, back in the roles we'd played for so long. Me as the dutiful wife, him as the reserved stepson. But beneath the surface, everything had changed, and we both knew it. Victor didn't seem to notice the tension, too absorbed in whatever business deal was lighting up his phone. But that night, as I lay in bed beside him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over the next few days, Mason and I avoided being alone together, an unspoken agreement to keep our distance while we figured out how to navigate this new reality. But despite the space between us, I could feel his presence like a constant hum in the background, a reminder of the connection we shared. One evening, as Victor worked late in his study, Mason cornered me in the kitchen. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. I glanced toward the hallway, ensuring we were alone. "Not here," I whispered. "Let's go outside." We stepped onto the patio, the cool night air wrapping around us like a cloak. Mason leaned against the railing, his expression serious. "Something's not right," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "I overheard Dad on the phone earlier. He was talking about some offshore accounts and moving money around. It didn't sound legal." My stomach twisted. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I've been suspicious for a while now. His business deals never add up, and there's always this secrecy about them. But what I heard tonight confirms it. He's hiding something, Claire. Something big." I felt a wave of unease wash over me. Victor had always been guarded about his work, brushing off my questions with vague answers or dismissive comments. I'd assumed it was just his way, part of the distant, calculating man I'd married. But now, with Mason's words hanging between us, I realized there was more to it than I'd wanted to see. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mason hesitated, his jaw tightening. "We figure out what he's hiding. If it's as bad as I think it is, we need to protect ourselves." The next day, while Victor was out, Mason and I began searching the house for clues. It felt surreal, rummaging through drawers and filing cabinets in the home I'd shared with him for over a decade. But as we uncovered more documents, cryptic emails, bank statements with untraceable transfers, and a list of offshore account numbers, the truth became impossible to ignore. Victor wasn't just bending the rules, he was breaking them. "This is bad," Mason said, his brow furrowed as he studied one of the documents. "If this gets out, he could go to prison. And if we're tied to it..." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "We need to get out of this, Mason. We can't let him drag us down with him." He nodded, his gaze sharp. "Agreed. But we need more proof, something solid we can use if this blows up." That evening, Victor seemed oblivious to our growing unease. He poured himself a glass of scotch, settling into his favorite armchair with the confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe. But I couldn't look at him the same way. The man I'd shared my life with, the man I'd once trusted, now felt like a stranger, a dangerous one. "Claire," he said suddenly, his gaze flicking toward me. "You've been quiet lately. Everything all right?" I forced a smile, masking the storm inside me. "Just tired," I replied. "The trip took more out of me than I thought." He nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer, and returned his attention to his drink. But as I watched him, a flicker of resolve began to grow within me. Mason and I continued digging, piecing together the web of Victor's dealings. The more we uncovered, the darker it became. There were links to shell companies, payments to unknown entities, and hints of partnerships with people whose names sent a chill down my spine. One name, in particular, stood out. Dominic Vega. "Who is he?" I asked, staring at the name scrawled across one of the documents. Mason's expression darkened. "He's bad news. Dad mentioned him once, years ago. He's some kind of fixer, a guy who makes problems disappear. If Dad's working with him, it means whatever he's involved in is serious." A sense of dread settled over me. This wasn't just about money or tax evasion. This was something much bigger, something that could put us all in danger. A week later, the tension reached a breaking point. Victor confronted Mason in the study, his voice low but laced with anger. I stood just outside the door, my heart racing as I strained to hear their conversation. "You've been asking too many questions," Victor said, his tone cold. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to stop. Now." "I'm just trying to understand," Mason replied, his voice steady but defiant. "You've been keeping secrets, Dad. Big ones. And I think it's time you came clean." There was a long pause, and when Victor spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Stay out of it, Mason. That's not a warning, it's a promise." I felt a chill run down my spine as I hurried away, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd heard. Victor wasn't just hiding something. He was willing to do whatever it took to protect it. That night, Mason and I met in the guest house at the edge of the property, a place we knew Victor rarely visited. We sat side by side on the worn couch, the weight of our discoveries pressing down on us. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We need to get out." Both of us. But we can't just leave. We need to make sure we're safe. I nodded, my mind racing. We need leverage, something we can use to protect ourselves if Victor comes after us. Mason's gaze was steady. Then we keep digging, but we need to be careful. If he finds out what we're doing, he didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Victor wasn't just a husband or a father. He was a man with dangerous connections, and we were playing a game we weren't sure we could win. As the days passed, the tension in the house became unbearable. Every conversation with Victor felt like a test, every glance a potential threat. Mason and I worked quietly, piecing together the final pieces of the puzzle, knowing that time was running out. And as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to come crashing down. The house was eerily quiet the night it all came to a head. Victor had been unusually tense all day, his sharp commands and clipped tones setting everyone on edge. Mason stayed in his room for most of the afternoon, but I could feel the storm brewing. It was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. That evening, Victor called me into his study. The door was slightly ajar when I approached, and I hesitated before stepping inside. He was sitting at his desk, his laptop glowing in the dim light, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Close the door," he said without looking up. I obeyed, the weight of the room pressing down on me as I moved to stand in front of his desk. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made my stomach twist. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with steel. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I don't know what you mean." He set the glass down with deliberate care, the sound sharp in the silence. "Don't play games with me, Claire. I'm not in the mood." My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to maintain my composure. "Victor, I don't know what you're talking about." He leaned forward, his expression darkening. "I'm talking about you and Mason sneaking around this house like thieves, about the documents you've been going through, about the fact that you've been lying to my face." Panic surged through me, but I kept my voice steady. "You're being paranoid." His laugh was cold, humorless. "Am I? Then explain this." He turned the laptop toward me, and my blood ran cold as I saw the images on the screen. Surveillance footage, Mason and me in the guest house, poring over the documents we'd found. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Nothing to say?" Victor asked, his tone mocking. I didn't think so. I felt a wave of nausea as I realized the extent of his control. He'd been watching us, tracking our every move, waiting for the moment to strike. "Victor?" I began, my voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like." "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," he snapped, rising from his chair. "You and Mason conspiring against me, digging into things you don't understand." I took a step back as he approached, his presence looming. "We were just trying to understand, Victor. You've been hiding things that could ruin all of us." He stopped, his eyes narrowing. "What exactly do you think you've uncovered?" "Offshore accounts," I said, summoning all the courage I could. "Shell companies, payments to people like Dominic Vega. Victor, you're involved in things that could destroy everything." His expression shifted, a flicker of something dangerous passing over his face. "And what exactly do you plan to do with this information?" I hesitated, and that was all the answer he needed. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think you can threaten me? Use this against me? Let me make something very clear, Claire. I've built this life, this empire, and I won't let anyone, not even you, take it away from me." The fear in his voice was palpable, but so was the rage. I realized then that Victor wasn't just trying to protect himself. He was desperate. Before I could respond, the door to the study burst open, and Mason stepped inside, his face flushed with anger. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice steady but fierce. Victor turned, his expression shifting to one of disbelief. "You're defending her now? After everything?" "Yes," Mason replied, moving to stand beside me, "because she's the only one in this house who hasn't completely lost her soul." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Mason. You're just a naive kid playing at being a hero." "Maybe," Mason said, "but I know enough to see what you've become, and I won't let you hurt her, or me." The room crackled with tension as father and son faced off, the weight of years of resentment and betrayal coming to a head. I felt the air grow thick, suffocating, as Victor's anger boiled over. You want to protect her? Victor snarled, his voice rising. Fine, but let me tell you something, Mason. This isn't a game. This is my life, our life, and you don't get to destroy it because you don't like how I play. Your life, Mason said, his tone sharp. That's all it's ever been about, hasn't it? You and your empire and your ego. You don't care about anyone else, not me, not Claire, just yourself. Victor's hand clenched into a fist, and for a moment, I thought he might strike Mason. But then he stepped back, his expression shifting to something colder, more calculating. You think you're so clever, he said, his voice low and dangerous. But you have no idea what you're getting yourselves into. You don't know the people I'm dealing with. If you keep pushing, you'll regret it. He turned to me, his gaze hard. And you, Claire, you think you can betray me and walk away unscathed? Think again. I felt a chill run down my spine as his words sank in. Victor wasn't bluffing. He was a man who had spent his life building power, and he wouldn't let it slip away without a fight. You should both leave, he said finally, his tone icy. Pack your things and get out of my house. But don't think for a second that this is over. Mason and I retreated to the guest house that night, our hearts heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. We packed quickly, knowing we couldn't stay under Victor's roof any longer. As we loaded our bags into Mason's car, I felt a mix of fear and relief. Fear for what Victor might do next, and relief that we were finally leaving. As we drove away, the house fading into the distance, Mason reached over and took my hand. We'll figure this out, he said softly. Together. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and doubt. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. A belief that, no matter what happened, we would face it together. It started with a door I forgot to knock on. It was late, well past 11 p.m., and the house was silent, except for the hum of the central air. I'd been heading upstairs to bed, carrying a basket of folded towels, when I noticed light spilling out from the half-open bathroom door. I assumed Cole, my stepson, had left it on by mistake. He's always been careless like that. A bit scatterbrained, forever leaving lights on, dishes in the sink, and his laundry in piles. But when I pushed the door open, ready to call him out for wasting electricity, I froze. He was there, sitting on the edge of the tub, shirtless, his sweatpants pushed down around his thighs. The water was running, steaming up the mirrors, but he wasn't bathing. His hand was gripping himself, his face turned toward the ceiling, eyes half closed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My first instinct was to slam the door and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my body betrayed me. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching as if I couldn't quite process what was happening. He didn't notice me at first. The soft groans slipping from his lips, the slow rhythm of his hand, he was completely lost in his own world. And then, he saw me. His head snapped toward the doorway, his eyes locking onto mine in a split second of stunned silence. He stammered, scrambling to cover himself with a towel. His face turned crimson, his voice thick with embarrassment. Sorry, I blurted, spinning around so fast I nearly dropped the towels. My heart was hammering as I fled down the hallway, leaving the door ajar behind me. I didn't stop until I was in my bedroom, the basket forgotten on the floor. My hands were shaking as I sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to calm my racing pulse. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. The flush of his skin, the sheer vulnerability of the moment. I told myself it was nothing. Just an awkward situation. A fluke. But even as I tried to push it from my mind, I felt a warmth spreading through me, something dark and unfamiliar. And that was the beginning. The next morning I told myself I'd imagined it, or at least exaggerated it in my mind. Maybe it hadn't been as intense as I remembered. Maybe I'd only caught the briefest glimpse, and my tired brain filled in the rest. That's what I told myself as I fixed my hair in the bathroom mirror, brushing through the streaks of gray that I'd stopped dyeing last year. Walter had already left for work. He always left early, sometimes before the sun even came up. Another big meeting or urgent deal that couldn't wait. I didn't mind his absence, not really. After nearly 12 years of marriage, the spark between us had dimmed to a faint flicker. We didn't fight, but we didn't talk much either. We'd settled into a routine, polite conversations over dinner, the occasional movie on the couch. Separate bedrooms most nights. Cole had moved back in a few months ago, shortly after finishing college. He wasn't like Walter. Where my husband was all sharp suits and stern expressions, Cole was relaxed, casual, almost boyish in his charm. He had a lazy confidence about him, the kind that came from knowing you were good-looking and charismatic. He was tall, lean but muscular, with sandy blonde hair that always looked like he'd just rolled out of bed. When I came downstairs, he was already in the kitchen, standing at the counter in nothing but a pair of gym shorts. He was pouring a cup of coffee, the sunlight streaming through the window, highlighting the defined lines of his back and shoulders. I hesitated for a moment, then cleared my throat as if I hadn't just been admiring him. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone casual as I grabbed a mug from the cabinet. He turned to face me, leaning against the counter with a cocky smirk that made me instantly suspicious. "Sleep well?" His tone was light, but there was something in the way he looked at me, like he knew I hadn't. My stomach twisted, but I forced a smile. "Fine, thanks. You?" he shrugged. "Yeah, didn't think I'd see you last night, though." The coffee pot sputtered, breaking the silence that followed. My cheeks burned and I turned away, busying myself with sugar and cream. He wasn't saying it outright, but he didn't have to. We both knew what he meant. "I didn't mean to walk in," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. "It was an accident." "Don't worry about it," he said, his smirk softening into something gentler. "It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. At least it felt like one to me. That afternoon I went to the gallery to distract myself. It was a small place, tucked into a corner of downtown, filled with overpriced paintings and sculptures that only a handful of regular clients could afford. I spent most of my shift rearranging displays and chatting with the occasional customer. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Cole. It wasn't just what I'd seen, it was the way he'd looked at me this morning. Like he was testing me, waiting to see how I'd react. It unsettled me. But it also intrigued me. When I got home, Walter's car was gone, as usual. Cole was in the living room, sprawled out on the couch with the TV on and his feet propped up on the coffee table. He looked up when I walked in, his face breaking into an easy smile. "Hey, Viv," he said. He'd taken to calling me by my first name lately. At first, it had bothered me, there was something too familiar about it, but now I found that I didn't mind. "Hey," I said, kicking off my shoes and setting my bag down. "What are you watching?" "Some stupid action movie," he said with a shrug. "Nothing you'd like." I sat down in the armchair across from him, more out of habit than anything else. I wasn't really paying attention to the TV. My eyes kept drifting to him instead, the way his t-shirt clung to his chest, the slight stubble on his jawline. He looked comfortable, relaxed, like he belonged here in a way I never quite had. "Long day?" he asked, glancing over at me. "Not really," I said. "Just quiet." "You should have stayed home," he said, his tone teasing. "I could have kept you company." I laughed, but there was an edge to his words that I couldn't ignore. I told myself I was imagining it, reading too much into an innocent comment. But then he shifted, turning toward me so that our eyes met. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his gaze that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're tense," he said. "You should relax more." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look away. "Maybe I will." Over the next few days, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Or maybe things I'd been deliberately ignoring. The way Cole's hand would linger on my shoulder a moment too long when he passed me in the kitchen. The way his eyes followed me when I walked into a room. The way he leaned in just a little too close when we talked. And it wasn't just him. I caught myself watching him, too. Stealing glances when I thought he wasn't looking. Letting my mind wander to places it shouldn't. It wasn't just about what I'd seen in the bathroom, it was the way he made me feel. Alive. Desired. Like I was more than just Walter's wife or the woman who kept the house running. I told myself it was harmless, just a little crush, a passing fascination. But deep down, I knew better. One evening I was in the kitchen, finishing up the dishes, when Cole came in behind me. I didn't hear him at first, and when I turned around, he was so close that I almost bumped into him. "Sorry," he said, but he didn't move back. "It's fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, Neither of us moved. The air between us felt charged, heavy with something unsaid. His eyes flicked down to my lips, then back up to meet my gaze. I should have stepped away. I should have said something, anything, to break the tension. But I didn't. And in that moment, I realized there was no turning back. The line wasn't crossed in one grand, dramatic moment. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling, like pulling at the thread of a tightly wound sweater until it falls apart. Every glance, every touch, every word exchanged between us tugged at that thread, leaving me breathless and exposed. It started small, almost innocuous. Cole began lingering longer in the kitchen when I was there. He'd lean against the counter, watching me cook, his eyes drifting down my body in a way that was anything but casual. I tried to ignore it, but I could feel his gaze like a heat radiating through me. One evening, Walter was out of town again. Some business conference in Chicago. I'd poured myself a glass of wine and was sitting on the back patio, letting the evening breeze cool my flushed skin. Cole stepped outside, barefoot and shirtless, his gym shorts slung low on his hips. He carried a beer in one hand and a cocky grin on his face. "You're out here all by yourself?" he asked, taking a seat in the chair beside me. "Just enjoying the quiet," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. "Mind if I join you?" I shook my head, though I knew I should have said yes. His presence was dangerous, intoxicating, but I couldn't bring myself to send him away. We sat in silence for a while, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. The cicadas hummed in the background, a soft, rhythmic soundtrack to my racing thoughts. "You don't talk much about yourself," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. I glanced at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Just, you're always taking care of everyone else. Walter, this house, everything. But I don't think I've ever heard you talk about what you want." The question caught me off guard. What did I want? I'd spent so many years putting everyone else first that I wasn't sure I knew the answer anymore. "I don't know," I said finally. "I guess I don't think about it much." "You should," he said, his voice low and serious. "You deserve to have something for yourself." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment I forgot about all the reasons this was wrong. He wasn't just my stepson. He was a man, a young, confident, undeniably attractive man who made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. The first kiss happened a week later. Walter had left for an early morning meeting, and Cole and I were alone in the kitchen. I was standing by the sink, rinsing off the breakfast dishes, when I felt him behind me. He didn't touch me, but I could feel his presence, the warmth of his body just inches from mine. "You're too good at this," he said, his voice soft and teasing. "At what?" I asked, turning my head slightly. "Taking care of everyone. Cleaning up after us, being perfect all the time." I laughed, though it came out shaky. "Someone has to." He reached out then, his fingers brushing against my wrist as I set a plate on the drying rack. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly I turned to face him, and suddenly the space between us felt unbearably small. His eyes searched mine, as if waiting for permission, and I hated how badly I wanted to give it. "This is wrong," I whispered, but my voice lacked conviction. "I don't care," he said. And then he kissed me. His lips were warm and insistent, his hands gripping my waist as he pulled me closer. I should have pushed him away, but instead I melted into him, my fingers tangling in his hair. The kiss was desperate, hungry, years of longing and frustration pouring out all at once. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. His forehead rested against mine, his hands still on my waist. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't. That night marked the beginning of something I couldn't control. We were careful at first, stealing kisses in the shadows of the house, touching each other only when we were sure we wouldn't be caught. But the secrecy only made it more thrilling. Every brush of his hand, every stolen moment, felt like a forbidden indulgence I couldn't get enough of. It wasn't long before we stopped holding back. One evening, after Walter had gone to bed early, Cole found me in the laundry room. I was folding towels, my back to the door, when I felt his arms wrap around my waist. I gasped, my hands freezing mid-fold as he pressed his lips to the curve of my neck. "Cole," I whispered, but there was no protest in my voice. "I've been thinking about you all day," he murmured, his breath hot against my skin. My resolve crumbled, as it always did around him. I turned in his arms, letting him kiss me. his hand sliding under my shirt to caress my bare skin. The laundry room was cramped and poorly lit, but in that moment it didn't matter. All that mattered was the way he made me feel, wanted, alive, reckless. We didn't just confine ourselves to the house. One afternoon, he convinced me to meet him at the art gallery after hours. I hesitated at first, knowing how risky it was, but the thought of being alone with him somewhere other than home was too tempting to resist. The gallery was dimly lit, the faint glow of the security lights casting long shadows on the walls. He was waiting for me by the back entrance, his expression unreadable. "You sure about this?" I asked as I stepped inside. He didn't answer. Instead, he took my hand and led me to the small office in the back. The door clicked shut behind us, and suddenly, we were on each other, his lips on mine, his hands sliding under my dress. The thrill of being in such a public place, of knowing we could be caught at any moment, only heightened the intensity of it. Afterward, as we lay tangled together on the small office couch, I traced lazy circles on his chest and tried not to think about the consequences of what we'd just done. As the days turned into weeks, the affair consumed us. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word felt like adding fuel to a fire that neither of us wanted to put out. I told myself it was just physical, a way to fill the emptiness that had been growing inside me for years. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It wasn't just about the way he touched me or the way he made me feel. It was the way he looked at me, like I was the only woman in the world. It was the way he listened when I talked, the way he made me laugh, the way he reminded me of the person I used to be before life had worn me down. But even as I let myself fall deeper into him, a part of me knew it couldn't last. Secrets like ours never stayed hidden for long, and the more reckless we became, the closer we came to being caught. The fire we'd started was growing out of control. It wasn't just the way Cole would steal a kiss when no one was looking, or the way I'd sneak into his room late at night when Walter was snoring down the hall. It was the constant craving. The way my thoughts drifted to him when I should have been focusing on work. The way his texts would light up my phone and send a thrill through me, even in the middle of a conversation with someone else. We were bold, almost reckless. The secrecy made it electric, but the more we gave in to our desires, the less careful we became. One night, while Walter was away on a 3-day business trip, Cole and I ventured to the guest house behind the property. It was an old space, mostly used for storage now, but it had once been a cozy retreat, complete with a kitchenette, a small living area, and a bed that hadn't been slept in for years. He led me there after dinner, his hand tugging mine with that confident smile he always wore when he wanted something. "No one will bother us here," he said, as we stepped inside. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and aged wood, but neither of us cared. The second the door closed, he had me pressed against it, his lips devouring mine, his hands sliding under the hem of my blouse. "I've been thinking about this all day," he murmured, his voice low and husky. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My breath hitched as he pushed me toward the bed, his movements urgent but deliberate, his lips trailing down my neck. There was something intoxicating about being in a place so close to home, yet completely removed from it. The bed creaked under our weight, the dim light from the single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. For a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. But the world had a way of creeping back in. The next morning, as I was walking back to the main house, I saw Elaine, our nosy neighbor, standing on the edge of her property with a watering can in hand. She waved, her smile overly friendly, but there was something in her eyes that made my stomach twist. "Good morning, Vivienne," she called out. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. "Didn't know anyone still used the guest house," she said, her tone light but probing. "Thought it was just collecting dust these days." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, then she turned back to her flowers, humming softly to herself. I walked inside, my heart pounding. Had she seen us? Was she just fishing for information? Either way, the encounter left me rattled. Elaine wasn't the only problem. The gallery was hosting a small private event one evening, and I'd been busy all day preparing for it. By the time the guests began arriving, I was running on autopilot, greeting clients and making small talk, while my thoughts remained elsewhere. And then Cole showed up. I hadn't invited him, of course, but there he was, leaning casually against the bar in a crisp button-down shirt that made him look older than his years. When our eyes met across the room, my heart skipped a beat. "What are you doing here?" I hissed when I managed to pull him aside. "I wanted to see you," he said, his voice low and playful. "You're always busy here, so I figured I'd come to you." "This isn't the time," I said, glancing around nervously. "Relax," he said, his hand brushing against mine in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. "No one knows anything." But I wasn't so sure. I could feel Elaine's eyes on me, and I swore I saw her whispering to another guest while glancing in our direction. Later that night, after the event had ended and the guests had gone, Cole stayed behind to help me clean up. The tension between us was palpable, and it wasn't long before we were tangled together in the small storage room, his hands lifting my skirt as my back pressed against the shelves. It was thrilling, forbidden, and utterly reckless. The more time we spent together, the more possessive Cole became. It started with little things. He'd ask who I was texting or why I hadn't answered his calls. At first, I thought it was sweet, a sign that he cared. But as the weeks went on, his jealousy became harder to ignore. One evening, I came home from the gallery to find him waiting for me in the living room. Walter was still at work, as usual, and the house was eerily quiet. "Who's Adam?" he asked, holding up my phone. "What?" I asked, confused. "You got a text from someone named Adam," he said, his tone accusatory. "Who is he?" I snatched the phone from his hand, my annoyance flaring. "He's a client. We were discussing a painting he wants to buy. That's it." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "I don't like the idea of other men texting you," he said finally. His words sent a chill through me, but I brushed it off. "You're being ridiculous," I said, walking past him toward the kitchen. But his jealousy didn't stop there. Things took a darker turn one afternoon when Walter's secretary, Clara, came by the house unexpectedly. She was dropping off some documents for Walter, who was in the middle of a conference call. I invited her in, offering her a glass of water while she waited. Cole walked into the room, his expression darkening when he saw her sitting at the kitchen table. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone sharp. "This is Clara," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Walter's secretary." He didn't respond, but the tension in the room was palpable. Clara seemed oblivious, chatting politely while Cole stood there, his jaw clenched, his eyes never leaving her. After she left, he turned to me, his voice low and angry. "I don't trust her." "Cole, she's just doing her job," I said, exasperated. "She's always here when Walter's not." He said, "Doesn't that seem suspicious to you?" I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I'd had my suspicions about Clara for months. Walter was careful, but I wasn't blind. The cracks in our arrangement were beginning to show. Cole's possessiveness was becoming harder to ignore, and Walter's increasingly secretive behavior only added to the strain. I was caught in the middle, trying to balance a web of lies that was growing more tangled by the day. And then Elaine dropped the bombshell. She came to the house one afternoon, holding a manila envelope. Her smile was tight, her eyes cold as she handed it to me. "You might want to take a look at this," she said before walking away. Inside the envelope were photos, grainy, poorly lit, but unmistakable. Me and Cole in the guest house, in the gallery, in his bedroom. My stomach dropped. Elaine had seen everything, and now she held all the cards. The manila envelope sat on the kitchen counter, a ticking time bomb. My hands trembled as I sifted through the photos, my stomach twisting tighter with each one. Elaine's shadowy figure must have been lurking for weeks, snapping these at just the right moment. The last photo was the worst, taken through the guest house window. It showed me sitting on the bed, Cole leaning over me, his face buried in my neck. There was no denying what was happening. I felt the room spin as Elaine's smug face replayed in my mind. Her final words echoed, "We all have secrets, Vivienne. But some secrets are more expensive than others." Elaine's terms came the next morning. She cornered me in the driveway as I was leaving for the gallery, holding a cup of coffee and a sickly sweet smile. "You're going to sell me that Cranston painting," she said, cutting straight to the point. My stomach lurched. The Cranston was the gallery's centerpiece, a prized, six-figure abstract piece I'd curated for months to bring in the wealthiest clientele. "Elaine, I can't just—" "You can," she interrupted. Her smile widened, showing too many teeth. You will, because if you don't, Walter and the entire town will see what you've been up to with that stepson of yours. And let's face it, Vivian, you're not exactly the forgiving type. She had me. There was no point arguing. If Walter found out, I'd lose everything. The house, my marriage, my already fragile reputation. And worse, Cole's life would be ruined before it had even begun. Fine, I said, my voice hollow. I'll arrange the sale. Good girl, she said, patting my shoulder, like a condescending teacher. I clenched my fists as she walked away, my chest burning with humiliation and rage. That evening, the blackmail was still gnawing at me as I poured myself a second glass of wine. Walter was in his office upstairs, his phone glued to his ear as usual. But this time, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Elaine wasn't wrong. Walter's late nights and urgent business trips had started long before Cole and I had crossed any lines. Fueled by desperation and anger, I crept upstairs to his office, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. His briefcase sat open on the desk, a stack of papers neatly organized inside. But it wasn't the papers that caught my attention. It was his phone, buzzing with a message from Clara. Can't stop thinking about last night. See you tomorrow? My hand tightened around the edge of the desk as bile rose in my throat. So it was true. Walter wasn't just neglectful, he was a liar. The knowledge should have made me feel justified, vindicated even. But instead, it left me cold. I couldn't think about it now. Not with Elaine's threats hanging over my head and Cole waiting for me downstairs. The boiling point came 2 nights later. I'd stayed late at the gallery, finalizing the paperwork to sell the Cranston to Elaine for a fraction of its worth. When I arrived home, I found Cole pacing in the kitchen, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. Where were you? He demanded as I set down my bag. At work, I said, too exhausted to match his intensity. What's wrong? What's wrong? He snapped. Elaine just stopped by. My blood ran cold. What did she say? She asked a lot of questions, he said, his voice rising. About the guest house, about us. She knows, doesn't she? Keep your voice down, I hissed, glancing toward the stairs. Vivienne, answer me, he shouted. Before I could respond, Walter appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion and irritation. What the hell is going on here? Cole froze, his anger replaced by panic. I stepped between them, trying to keep my voice calm. Nothing, Walter. Cole's just upset about something at work. Don't lie to me, Walter said, his voice icy. I've been suspicious for weeks. The way you two act around each other. What are you hiding? I opened my mouth to respond, but Cole beat me to it. Why don't you ask Clara? He spat, his voice dripping with venom. Walter's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. What did you just say? You heard me, Cole said, stepping closer. You're not exactly innocent in all this, are you? The room crackled with tension, Walter's anger rising to match Cole's. And then it happened. Walter lunged forward, shoving Cole back against the counter. You little bastard. Stop it, I screamed, grabbing Walter's arm. But it was too late. Cole pushed back, harder than he intended, and Walter stumbled. His foot caught on the edge of the rug, and he fell backward, his head striking the edge of the counter with a sickening thud. For a moment, everything went still. Walter lay crumpled on the floor, blood pooling beneath his head. Cole stared at him in horror, his chest heaving. Oh my God, I whispered, dropping to my knees beside Walter. He's breathing, Cole said, his voice shaky. Call 911, I said, my hands trembling as I pressed a towel to Walter's head.